The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Unfortunately, Statistics Canada has revealed today that economic growth in Canada in the third quarter was at just 1%, a weak 1%, a third lower than expected, two-thirds lower than in the United States. Our per capita GDP has gone down for the last 8 quarters out of 9. And it's going down more quickly than in any other G7 country. Is this not the proof that doubling the debt and increasing taxes on capital gains is destroying our economy? The Honourable Minister of Public Works and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Conservative Leader is looking for good news. Well, interest rates are down. Inflation is down. Unemployment is down. But it's Halloween, Mr. Speaker, and there's one thing that scares kids. It's that the Conservative Leader refuses to get his security clearance to protect Canadians and members of his caucus. When's he going to answer the question and protect? It's a question that all kids are asking today. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition. What's scaring people is that their paychecks are getting smaller, Mr. Speaker, every year. And that paycheck can't buy a house because this government doubled the cost of housing. That minister, he's been trying to find affordable housing in his city, and he hasn't been able to after 9 years of this Liberal government, which has doubled the cost, despite the fact that in my time, we built 180,000 new affordable homes, and now we're proposing to cut the GST on new homes. Will he accept my common sense plan? The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, kids in my riding are smarter than the Conservative Leader thinks. They know how to count up to 6, and it's indeed 6 affordable housing units that the Conservative Leader built. Not in my riding, but in all of Canada throughout his entire mandate when he was in charge of housing at the time. But Canadian kids need to know if they should be scared of him. He's not getting a security clearance to protect his own MPs. Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Statistics Canada reported terrible news for the Canadian economy today. It grew at a meager 1%, a third lower than foreseen, and lower than our population grew. In fact, it was the 8th out of the last 9th economic quarter where our per capita GDP shrunk. It's fallen more than any other G7 country since the year before COVID. This is the direct result of higher taxes on capital gains, on energy, on work. Why won't they accept our common sense plan? Better yet, why don't they call a carbon tax election so we can fix the economy?
The Honourable Minister for Employment and Workforce Development.
I know the Leader of the Official Opposition doesn't like facts getting in the way of his good Halloween story, but here are the facts. Mr. Speaker, 1.6% inflation. The Bank of Canada Governor...
Colleagues, it's important for those, of course, to be able to follow, and for the chair to be able to follow what's being said. I'm having difficulty hearing this. I know people who are using translation devices are also having difficulty. The Honourable Minister of Employment and Workforce Development from the top, please.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. There is a lot of chocolate being consumed on the other side. You can see how energized the Conservatives are, but they're upset because we're sharing the facts. 1.6% inflation in this country. Interest rates are down. 47,000 new jobs in the last month. The International Monetary Fund has Canada positioned as the fastest growing economy in the G7 in 2025. What else, Mr. Speaker? We're going to keep supporting Canadians. We're going to build houses from coast to coast. The Conservatives don't need to like it, but that's how we're supporting Canadians each and every day.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the American economy is roaring while the Canadian economy is snoring. In the most recently reported economic quarter, U.S. GDP grew 3 times faster than Canadian, despite our out-of-control population growth. In fact, per-person income is now lower than it was 10 years ago in Canada, while it's gone up 18% in the U.S. The gap between U.S. and Canadian incomes is worse than at any time in the last century. Why would they call it carbon tax elections so Canadians can vote for powerful paychecks that buy affordable homes on safe streets?
The Honourable Minister for Employment and Workforce Development.
Mr. Speaker, it's quite surprising that the Leader of the Opposition isn't taking the bare facts on board. But quite frankly, not just 1.6 inflation or 47,000 jobs. Let's go to what he's trying to distract Canadians from, which as Leader of the Official Opposition, as somebody who someday wants to sit on this side of the House, will simply not go and do the work to get his security clearance. He will not protect his MPs. He will not protect Canadians. Shame on him, Mr. Speaker. Get his security clearance.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Collapsing a per-person economy. It means lower wages, which means that Canadians can afford less food, less housing, and governments can afford less for schools and hospitals. It's the direct result. So these are first economic data points that have come out since they jacked up the capital gains tax and now driving billions of dollars south of the border. Why don't they follow our common sense plan to axe taxes? In fact, in addition to getting rid of the carbon tax, why not follow our plan to axe the GST on new homes to build 30,000 more per year? It's common sense. Let's bring it home.
The Honourable Minister for Employment and Workforce Development.
Mr. Speaker, we can do the facts game all day long. Let's just focus. The Leader of the Opposition likes to remind people that he has roots in Alberta. So let's talk about the Liberal government's investments in Alberta, Mr. Speaker. $22 billion in clean energy investments for clean electricity, for hydrogen, for greening the grid, for making sure that we have the greenest barrel of oil in the world, Mr. Speaker. The third in the world for foreign direct investment. We are the #1 in the world per capita for foreign direct investment. They don't want to tell Canadians about it. We will, and we'll make sure there are good jobs from coast to coast to coast.
Other Randy is ahead of you,
The Honourable Member for Salaberry-Surwa. The Liberals' decision to abandon seniors is heartless. Their insinuations suggesting that seniors are too rich to deserve a pension increase are deplorable. There are retirees in Quebec who rely solely on their pension income. They don't have a rainy day fund to face rent increases. They don't have room in their budget to replace their old cars, even with a used one. They're putting food back on the shelves at the supermarket. Why would the Liberals rather risk an election than come to help seniors? The Honourable Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship. Mr. Speaker, every time that we've put forward proposals to help seniors, the Bloc has voted against them. Even with dental care, where it's very, very popular in the members' riding. I heard the Leader of the Bloc say that initiative is poison, and that's absolutely ridiculous. I would ask the Bloc to, think more closely about what it's doing instead of just paving the way forward for the Leader of the Opposition. The Honourable Member for Salaberry-Surwa. The Quebec Lieutenant is against the pension increase of 10% because there are, among seniors aged 65 to 74, a few rich people like him who don't need it. But it's false. Rich people like him are seeing their pensions cut with clawbacks at tax time. But the 10% increase, they're still already giving it to everyone 75 and up. It's universal. If the Liberals think that it's fair as soon as you turn 75, well, it's also fair for seniors 74 and under. So why are the Liberals treating 1 million Quebecers like second-class seniors? The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The colleague is looking for problems with the Liberal approach. Now, since 2015, Mr. Speaker, we have been there to help seniors, and we have reduced senior poverty by about 20% through measures that the Bloc and the Conservatives have opposed. But now they're looking for friends, and I would like to warn them that having the Conservatives as a friend in the House of Commons, it's very dangerous for Quebecers. The Conservatives want to cut everything that's in place, including the Canada Dental Care Plan, which is helping 900,000 seniors get affordable dental care right now. The Honourable Member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie. Mr. Speaker, thousands of renters are very worried their landlords could be using YieldStar software to come to agreements between themselves to raise the cost of rent. In the United States, the FBI has launched an inquiry into that software. We know that YieldStar is used by major landlords in Canada, but the Liberals and the Conservatives are refusing to investigate this to protect profits of big landlords. Will the Liberals defend renters and launch an inquiry so that we can know if landlords are guilty of collusion to increase rent? The Honourable Minister of Innovation. Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his question. The pratique that he's describing is completely unacceptable, Mr. Speaker. Today, I will write to the Competition Board to ask that an inquiry be undertaken. Thanks to the new powers that we've given to the Competition Bureau, Mr. Speaker, we're going to shed light on this issue on this side of the House. We are always going to be on the sides of renters. We will always be on the side of consumers. We will always be on the side of Canadians, Mr. Speaker. This is a major issue, and we are going to defend Canadians.
The Honourable Member from Port Moody, Coquitlam.
This is always the way with the Liberals, Mr. Speaker. Behind the scenes, not transparent, gentlemen's agreements. Get it out in the open. Canadian renters are struggling with skyrocketing rents. Tenants are calling on this government to investigate the potential use of AI software by their corporate landlords to hike their rent. The same AI software is under investigation by the FBI in the United States. Yet the Liberals and the Conservatives have stood by greedy corporate landlords by refusing to investigate. Will the Liberals support an investigation into the use of AI in rent fixing and protect Canadians from illegal rent gouging?
The Honourable Minister for Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, I wish the colleague just have heard my answer. We are going to launch an investigation. That's exactly what I said, Mr. Speaker. It's completely unacceptable what we've seen. I'm going to be writing to the Competition Commissioner today to launch an investigation, but the NDP should celebrate what we've done because thanks to our party, Mr. Speaker, we have now powers within the Act in order to investigate. Mr. Speaker, we'll always be on the side of renters, we'll always be on the side of consumers, and we'll always be on the side of Canadians, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Wellington, Halton Hills.
Mr. Speaker, more bad news from experts. New Stats Can data shows that per person GDP is shrinking again. For the 8th time in the last 9 quarters, Canadians are getting poorer. This is a made-in-Canada per capita recession that's lasted 2 years, caused by a government that's driven out investment by hiking taxes on everything: income, financial institutions, housing, fuel, and investment. The opposite is happening elsewhere. Yesterday, the U.S. Commerce Department said the U.S. economy grew at 2.8% last quarter. Will the government admit that this is a made-in-Canada per capita recession?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, it seems that Conservatives can't see past their own doomsday narrative. Canada leads the G7 in reaching a soft landing in the global post-pandemic surge in inflation and highest interest rates. The first G7 country to cut interest rates not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 4 times in a row. This is good news for homeowners who currently have mortgages that need renewal and for first-time homebuyers. Inflation has fallen to 1.6% in September, marking 9 consecutive months within the Bank of Canada's target range. I count that as good news for Canadians, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Wellington, Halton Hills.
Mr. Speaker, here's another expert from the Bank of Canada, Deputy Governor Carolyn Rogers. On March 24th, she issued a stark warning. She said Canada is falling behind other countries because of weak business investment, a lack of competition, and a failure to integrate immigrants into the workforce, all responsibilities of this government. She said, and I quote, I'm saying that it's an emergency. It's time to break the glass. Simple question. Does the government agree with the Bank of Canada that we are in an economic emergency of their making?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Innovation.
Canada Governor has also reported numerous times that our government has stuck to its fiscal guardrails, which through that discipline has allowed for inflation to drop in this country. The IMF also, in their World Economic Outlook, projects Canada to have the highest growth in the G7 in 2025. Wages in Canada have outpaced inflation for 20 months in a row. For Canadians, that means more jobs, better wages, and a higher living standard. We should be positive, and I will never apologize for being positive about the future of this country.
The Honourable Member from Durham.
New data from StatsCan confirms a made-in-Canada GDP recession. Over 8 of the last 9 quarters, per capita GDP is in decline. To put that in practical terms, Mr. Speaker, the average American now earns $20,000 more than the average Canadian. The root cause is the Prime Minister's tax hikes. When will the Prime Minister axe the tax hikes that are making Canadians poorer?
Great question.
The Honourable Minister for Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, I'll tell something that a Conservative they won't acknowledge. The root cause of our success, Mr. Speaker, is our Canadian workers, Mr. Speaker. We have attracted record level of investment in this country. These people are reading, I don't know what. Talk to Volkswagen, talk to Honda, talk to Dow Chemical, Mr. Speaker.
Order. The Honourable Member from South Shore, St. Margaret's, please. I'm going to invite the Honourable Minister to start again. The Honourable Minister.
Speaker, I will always stand up in this house to talk about good news about Canada, Mr. Speaker. Exactly. Canadians should be cheering. This is the land of possibility, of opportunities. We have attracted record level of investment, Mr. Speaker, in this country. Just talk to the CEO of Honda, of Volkswagen, of Dow Chemical, of Nordvolt. People are investing in this country because they believe in our workers. We have the best workers in the world. We have the critical minerals. We have the energy. We have the access to market. We have what we need to win in the 21st century, Mr. Speaker.
Before I return the floor to the Honourable Member from Durham, I'm going to ask for the second time the Honourable Member from South Shore, St. Margaret's, to please not take the floor unless recognized by the Chair. The Honourable Member from Durham.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals across the aisle may be having a party or some kind of celebration, it seems, but in the process, they are cutting the standard of living in Canada. They are slashing the quality of life for people in our country. It's their tax hikes, their increases in the capital gains tax, housing tax, carbon tax that are making life difficult for Canadians across our country. When will they accept some responsibility for what's happened for the last 9 years and axe the tax hikes that are making Canadians poorer?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Leader of the Government in the House.
Talk about celebrations. 10 years ago today, former Conservative MP Dean Del Mastro was found guilty, Mr. Speaker, of violating the Elections Act. That was the leader of the Conservatives' buddy at the time, Mr. Speaker. He actually went on to become the Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister, and the Parliamentary Secretary at the time was the leader of the Conservative Party, who was advanced to become the Minister responsible for elections. He tried to delete thousands of Canadians from being able to vote, Mr. Speaker. Why should any Canadian have confidence in the leader of the Conservative Party, Mr. Speaker?
None I have.
The Honourable Member for... The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, let's be serious. We all know that this government is costing Canadians a lot of money, but now StatsCan is proving it. The last numbers show that per capita GDP has dropped 8 times over the last 9 quarters. What does that mean? That means that GDP has gone up barely by 1% this quarter. In the United States, it's up 3%. The Americans are 3 times luckier than Canadians because of this government. Will the government finally understand that increasing taxes doesn't help Canadians? The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. So on Halloween, my esteemed colleague that I, respect a lot can invent as many numbers as he wants. It's not going to work. What he can do is ask his colleague, who's sitting right next to him, the member for Brantford-Brant, to rise at least one time in this House to apologize for his words about French last week. The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. The member knows very well that he apologized, Mr. Speaker. What's the reality here? The reality is that it's time to put the focus on the economic reality. And if this university professor was attentive to reality, then he would see what StatsCan has put forward and that it's real. And even The Economist, I'm sure he's familiar with The Economist, he's probably read it at least once in his life. The Economist concluded that Canada is now lower than Alabama, the poorest state in the United States. Is he proud of his record? The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Well, let's talk about 3 realities. Economic reality, interest rates are down, inflation is down, unemployment is down. Let's talk about the reality that the Conservative leader still doesn't understand on Halloween. It's that the Canada Dental Care Plan exists. It hasn't magically disappeared. The 3rd reality, it's that the member for Brantford-Brant has still not apologized in this House. The Honourable Member for Mirabel. Mr. Speaker, it's Halloween, and the worst house of horrors is right here in Ottawa. It's the Canada Revenue Agency. Fraudsters got $6 million in fake tax returns. The agency didn't even realize that different people were seeing their money paid into the same bank account. And that's not it, Mr. Speaker. There's one particular fraudster who managed to modify his tax returns to try and get $40 million back. And the CRA gave him $10 million before the guy's bank told them that something fishy was going on. How many other cases like this of fraudsters who have 2 hands in the candy jar? The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, fraud is completely unacceptable, and I can assure you that we are taking the necessary measures to deal with the situation. Obviously, the CRA, with all the personal information that it has, is a target of choice, but it's not the agency that's directly targeted, but often the information that we share as citizens through different systems is more at risk. So personally, we all need to be more careful, but the agency is very vigilant. We have experts who are being very careful, and as soon as fraud is identified, the citizen impacted is informed and the account is blocked, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Mirabel. Mr. Speaker, the Minister might think that it's our fault, but we want to know how many other times the agency has been a victim of fraud because there's a lack of verification, because the agency has been hiding the real numbers. Since 2020, in 2020, they've told the Privacy Commissioner there have been 113 cases where private information has been used for fraud. But when media asked questions, the agency revealed that it wasn't 113 cases, there were more than 31,000 cases. The minister, meanwhile, is a true ghost. She's refused to stand and participate in interviews, so why can't she tell the truth the first time? The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. Mr. Speaker, you know, I do what I say what I do, and I'm not hiding from anyone. The law prevents us from discussing specific cases. The member knows that. However, the agency is very well equipped. We have experts. We're working with all kinds of specialists. We're working with other countries as well to share best practices, and There was a meeting just 2 weeks ago in Ottawa, and I can tell you that we're doing what we have to do, and we have the experts that we need. The Honourable Member for Mirabel. Mr. Speaker, we're seeing more and more fraud at the CRA because nobody is doing the necessary verifications, including the Minister, who has the power to request investigations. And that's not even counting cases where there was, or the agency frauded itself, where we had 330 employees who gave themselves a CERB and had to be fired. It's vampires who are guarding the blood bank, Mr. Speaker. The CRA is haunted by problems with verification, with accountability, with transparency, with leadership. It needs a little exorcism, I think. When is the Minister going to clean things up? The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, the Canada Revenue Agency has 60,000 employees. When we went through COVID, there were a number of countries that envied us because our country, our Liberal government, did what was necessary to help people, to help businesses, and that's why we've had a softer landing than almost any other country in the world. 60,000 employees, and all those who got CERB were verified one by one because, they did what was necessary, and the necessary actions were taken.
The Honourable Member from Thornhill.
Just a few days after the Leader of the Opposition introduced a common sense plan to axe the GST on new home sales, even the Housing Minister's own advisors were raving about the proposal. Right. Economist Dr. Mike Moffat said, quote, "It's a bold, bold plan," and he calls himself, quote, "a big fan of the idea." He and other Canadians know that housing has become out of reach and the government has doubled its costs in this country. So will the Housing Minister listen to his own advisors and implement our common sense tax cut so that Canadians can finally afford a home?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
If the member is going to quote Mike Moffat, Mr. Speaker, she ought to include the entire quote. What he said was that if the Conservative proposal was to go ahead, they ought not to propose things like getting rid of the Housing Accelerator Fund. They ought not to also get rid of infrastructure programs that enable housing, Mr. Speaker. He should listen. If he doesn't want to listen to Liberal MPs, that's fine. He should listen to Conservative MPs, a dozen, Mr. Speaker, probably more, who want the Accelerator Fund, who have advocated for it because they know it's vital to getting more homes built.
The Honourable Member from Thornhill.
Or maybe that member should listen to the Housing Minister, who said his $3 billion of Housing Accelerator money built 0 homes. Right. 0 is less than the 195,000 homes built under the Leader of the Opposition when he was Housing Minister. And now add this to the stellar record of a guy who broke our immigration system, who lost track of all of the people that he let in. While the Prime Minister is fighting his own caucus, he gave that minister a promotion. So when will the Housing Minister leave fantasy land, join Conservatives in the real world, and axe the tax so we can build the homes?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Years ago, Mr. Speaker, when I worked with the Leader of the Opposition on the Finance Committee, he told me something that might shock you. It's hard for him to make friends because of his personality. What we look at now is he at least has one friend on the opposite side. His best friend, as I understand it, Mr. Speaker, the MP for St. Albert Edmonton. In fact, that member has advocated for the Housing Accelerator Fund. He went behind the Leader's back. I hope it doesn't affect their relationship, their friendship, Mr. Speaker. He went behind his Leader's back to advocate for the half, and they want to get rid of it.
Order. But if you're going to heckle, let it be a good joke. The Honourable Member from Kenora.
They're not worth the cost of housing, Mr. Speaker, and many young Canadians have given up completely on their dream of home ownership, and it is why common sense Conservatives will axe the federal sales tax on new homes. Mr. Speaker, for an $800,000 house, this tax cut would save the home buyer $40,000. In other words, $2,200 per year in mortgage payments. So, Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister finally listen to our common sense plan axe the GST on housing to ensure that young Canadians can finally afford a home.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Housing and Construction Canadians.
Slogans, Mr. Speaker. You scratch the surface of that so-called idea, what do you find? They would act something that would get rid of the Housing Accelerator Fund, which is so crucial. What does it do? It provides funding for affordable housing to counter homelessness. It provides funding for zoning changes. It provides funding for housing enabling infrastructure, for community centers, Mr. Speaker, even for vacant buildings in downtowns, Mr. Speaker, so they can be converted for housing. If he doesn't believe me, take the member for Central Okanagan who advocated for it, their former finance critic who unfortunately is on the back benches because he advocates for good programs.
The Honourable Member from Winnipeg Centre.
Mr. Speaker, this week Special Interlocutor Kimberly Murray delivered her final report on missing and disappeared Indigenous children and unmarked burials in Canada. Among the obligations was adding residential school denialism to the criminal code. It is an essential measure to protect survivors from incitements of hate and violence. The Attorney General accepted this report, but will he listen to survivors, adopt my bill, put an end to the incitement of hate, and implement this obligation now?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister for Crown Indigenous Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague from Winnipeg Centre for that very important question. I want to acknowledge the report from the Special Interlocutor, which was received by the Attorney General earlier this week. It puts forward some very compelling issues that should be discussed and studied. We as a government are going to look into it, and we will get back to both the Special Interlocutor as well as Canadians on next steps forward.
The Honourable Member from Nanaimo Ladysmith.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians' homes have been swept away in floods, and hundreds of people have died in BC's heat waves. This week, the Lancet report revealed a stark escalation in health threats caused by the climate crisis. Despite this, and against all advice, the Liberals keep handing out billions in subsidies to oil and gas. And the Conservatives can't even agree if climate change is real. The health of Canadians is at stake. Will the Liberals stop fueling the climate crisis and end fossil fuel subsidies today?
Yes.
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable colleague for her question. The good news is that Canada is the only G20 country to have eliminated fossil fuel subsidies thanks to the NDP, Mr. Speaker. I'd be happy to provide her office with a briefing on this. Thank you.
Bravo. The Honourable Member from Kitchener South Hespeler.
Mr. Speaker, dental care is health care. Today we have hit a milestone of 1 million Canadians who have already accessed care with our government's Canadian Dental Care Plan. A single visit to the dentist can cost hundreds of dollars. Canadians shouldn't have to cancel their dental appointment because they can't afford it. Can the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions tell this House how the Canadian Dental Care Plan will make life more affordable for Canadians?
The Honourable Minister for Mental Health and Addictions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to thank the member for her question. Mr. Speaker, today we've hit a milestone across this country. Over 1 million Canadians have access to dental care services. That is certainly something that we, on this side of the House, we are proud of, Mr. Speaker. But this is what we know. Here are the facts. Conservatives continue to vote against Canadians. They vote against dental care plans. They vote against the things that make life make sense. Common sense for Canadians, whether it is dental care, whether it is affordable child care, whether it is a national school food care program. On this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, we are taking care of what matters most to Canadians.
The Honourable Member from Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman.
After 9 years of this Liberal NDP government, taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, and time is up. The Parliamentary Budget Officer confirmed that the carbon tax is costing Canadians more than they get back. The Prime Minister's plan to quadruple the carbon tax will cost Manitoba families an extra $1,300 per year. Evergreen Basic Needs, a food bank in Gimli, Manitoba, has seen a 30% increase in usage since 2020. When will the Prime Minister finally start listening to Canadians and have a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Mr. Speaker, what the member is saying would be tragic if it was only true, which is not. The Parliamentary Budget Officer has said in his report that Canadian gets more money back from carbon pricing than what they pay, Mr. Speaker. And that's even after he doesn't factor in the impacts of climate change. July and August of 2024 are the costliest months ever. It's the costliest year ever for climate impacts in Canada. $7 billion in climate impacts, Mr. Speaker. What do the Conservatives have to say about that? Let the planet burn. Not on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker. We will work to fight climate change and we will work to support Canadians.
The honourable member from Selkirk Interlake Eastman.
The minister knows that a tax plan isn't an environment plan. And with the Prime Minister's out-of-touch policies and reckless spending, 1/4 of Canadians are relying on food banks this fall. Sadly, this includes members of the Canadian Armed Forces who can't afford to eat under this costly Liberal NDP government. Earlier this year, military personnel doing cyber training at Wills College had to rely on food banks because they couldn't afford to eat. At one point, college staff even had to set up a food bank to support them in the college. Will the Prime Minister quit making life more unaffordable for our troops and call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
I've heard a number of Conservative MPs just talk about Jasper. Let's talk about Jasper, Mr. Speaker. Do you know how much money?
Order, colleagues. Order. Order. The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change from the top.
Let's talk about Jasper, Mr. Speaker. Do you know how much they invested in 2011 in prescribed burns and mechanical removals around Jasper? $0, Mr. Speaker. They cut funding for $30 million in 2010, 2011, all the way to 2015. Do you know who was the director of the Minister of the Environment in those days? The member for Thornhill, Mr.
Colleagues, at some point we're going to run out of time to be able to have all the questions posed. The chair cannot hear the answer. Can we allow the minister to please give his answer so that we can move on and make sure that all the questions that have been planned to be asked today be asked today? The Honourable Minister from the top, please.
For 4 consecutive years, the Conservative Party of Canada slashed funding for Jasper fire prevention by $30 million every year, Mr. Speaker. We've invested in the last 6 years alone $800 million. And if the Conservatives want to blame someone, they can go and talk to their colleague from Thornhill, who was the director of the Minister of the Environment in those days, Mr. Speaker.
Order. Colleagues, I see members from all sides of the House who are dependent upon translation devices who cannot hear what the answer is, or in sometimes the question is. I'm going to ask the Honourable Member from Cumberland Colchester to ask this question. I'm asking all members to please listen attentively.
Speaker, after 9 years, the NDP Liberals are not worth the cost. Stats are clear. Nova Scotians relying on food banks have increased by over 50% in the last 5 years to over 40,000 visits per month. Another staggering report this morning shows that 40% of Atlantic Canadians are struggling to afford necessities like food, rent, and home heating. The failed former Minister of Immigration and now floundering Minister of Housing clearly cannot help Nova Scotians, but Speaker, there is an answer. Will the Prime Minister call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Innovation.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to start by saying Happy Halloween to Canadians today. But what kids should be most frightened about this Halloween is the cuts that would be made by the Conservative leader. And I apologize to Johnny Depp in advance, but the leader of the Conservatives is like the Edward Scissorhands of politics. You know what else is truly spooky is that the Conservative leader refuses to get his security clearance to protect Canadians against foreign interference. I can only speculate he must be concerned about the ghosts in his closet.
Colleagues, comparing any individual member to a fictional character is not within the realms of what we're doing here. I'm going to ask all members to restrain themselves from doing that. The honourable member from Brandon Source has the floor.
After 9 years of the NDP Liberal government, life is more expensive than ever.
That's right.
Food Banks Canada's hunger report indicates over 2 million Canadians used food banks in March, up 6% from last year. In my riding, the Samaritan House Food Bank saw nearly 2,000 more people accessing their services in the last 2 years. 4 in 10, Mr. Speaker, were children. 1 in 10 was a senior. Despite this, the NDP Liberals continue to increase the cost of groceries by increasing the carbon tax. When will this Prime Minister call a carbon tax election?
That's right. When? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Leader of the Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This question has already been answered. But let me tell you and talk about the foreign interference. The Leader of the Conservative Party says, Mr. Speaker, not to worry. My Chief of Staff has the clearance, and he will tell me. The Leader of the Conservative Party doesn't understand law, Mr. Speaker. It would be illegal for the Chief of Staff to give the names to the Leader of the Conservative Party, Mr. Speaker. It's time. It is time. Okay.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Order! Order! The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary has 7 seconds left on the clock.
Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Conservative Party doesn't understand it. He's asking his Chief of Staff to break the law. That is a bad thing. You need to understand. Breaking the law.
Order.
The Honourable Member for Berthier-Masquis-Longet. The filibuster in the Senate against C-282 and the protection of supply management should outrage every party. No one here should accept that 2 senators, 2 unelected senators, are trying to overturn the majority vote of all parties in this House. This is a full frontal assault on democracy. Peter Beam and Peter Harder are unelected individuals who act like monarchs appointed by divine right. Letting these 2 get away with it is like dialing democracy back 3 centuries. Enough. Will the Prime Minister ask them to immediately pass C-282? The Honourable Minister for National Revenue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With all the respect I have for my colleague, I feel that he should also respect our institutions, whatever his opinions of them are. It's important we are for supply management, 110% for supply management. We want this bill to be adopted. We supported this bill. A number of us have encouraged our Senate colleagues to act much more rapidly. We're asking them loud and clear to act with due diligence. We want it to come back as quickly as possible, but they are independent. We have to let them do their job. But we are ready to receive this bill once again. The Honourable Member for Berthier-Masquis-Longet. The biggest institution is our democracy, Mr. Speaker. Peter Beam and Peter Harder, 2 unelected individuals, even refused to meet with the Minister for International Trade at committee. And they took care to meet every imaginable group opposed to supply management, but they didn't want to see the minister. This is full proof that the Prime Minister must personally intervene. He is the one who appointed these senators, who now want to turn the Senate back into the House of Lords, superior to the House of the People. We can't allow this to happen. When will the Prime Minister finally ask his 2 monarchs to stop harming our farmers and producers? Before we move on to the answer, I would just like to remind all members It is part of our usual practices and it's part of our regulations to always be respectful of the other place and those who are taking care of the other place. So I'd ask members to be careful in the vocabulary used. The Honourable Minister for Public Services and Procurement. My colleague is right. Harming farmers and producers is exactly what the Bloc Québécois is doing by allying themselves with the Conservatives. Only the Conservatives are for now against supply management, so signing an alliance with them, saying that all they'll do now is try and trigger an election, means that they support Conservatives that will cut, including supply management. And so they're going to have to explain this to their electorate as well. The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Mr. Speaker, Moisson-Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean, a food bank, states that there are 2 times greater an amount of people asking for help than 2 years ago. More and more people are fighting just to feed themselves. The Bloc Québécois has done nothing for Quebec. Why does the Prime Minister and the leader of the Bloc Québécois prefer to feed bureaucracy in Canada rather than allow Quebecers to feed their families? The Honourable Minister for Fisheries and Oceans. Listen, the leader of the Conservatives and the Conservatives have always shown their true colours. They've confirmed that their main plan is to cut, Mr. Speaker. That's what the Conservatives are. Cut, chop, 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 chopping dental care, chopping helping families. With regards to small boat ports, chop, Mr. Speaker. Medicare, pharmacare, chop. They have understood. And children are scared of the Conservatives. It's Halloween and they are absolutely spooked by the Conservatives today. The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. It's rather ridiculous, Mr. Speaker. After 9 years of our Liberals, food banks cannot meet demand. 107% increase in food bank use in my riding. Those who used to give food are now those who are coming to get food. This because of this government's obsession to tax fuel and everything, and food. And the Bloc agrees because they voted for confidence twice. They voted against Quebec, so it's high time for an election. When will the Prime Minister finally trigger this election, Mr. Speaker? The Honourable Minister for Fisheries, Oceans and the Coast Guard. Mr. Speaker, you were right earlier. You can't compare people from fictional characters because the reality is worse than fictional characters, Mr. Speaker. What I would like to know is when will our colleagues inform us of the other cuts they will make? Cuts to the most vulnerable, those who they will attack, those who find it hard to put a roof over their heads. We are impatient to hear what they're going to cut next. And we invite them to clean up their own act and get their own security clearance before that. The Honourable Member for Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On this Halloween, the Liberal scarecrow has been spooking Canadians for 9 years now. They're impoverishing our families, our seniors, and our young people. With the pure complicity of the Bloc Québécois, they are letting the poor suffer and beg for food. Today, in the La Presse newspaper, the headline is The Silent Crisis. The Moisson-Montréal Food Bank notes a sharp increase in requests, with 1 million requests per month. And unfortunately, 14% of these requests are from students. Why do the leader of the Bloc and the Prime Minister prefer to feed the bureaucratic machine in Ottawa rather than allow Quebecers to feed their families? The Honourable Minister for Public Services and Procurement. It's rather astounding, Mr. Speaker, to hear Conservative members talking about how we need to take care of children when their very leader says that it's sheer bureaucracy to support breakfasts and free food in our schools, in my riding, in his riding. So how can my Conservative Quebec colleagues accept that their leader call this sheer bureaucracy. Oh, I know it's Halloween. I know that everyone's looking forward to trick-or-treating this evening, but come on. The Honourable Member for Pont-Jacques-Cartier has had his opportunity to ask us questions, so he should wait his next turn to speak. Now, the Honourable Member for Louis-Hébert. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Conservative leader comes to Quebec and has promised to fund a hypothetical third link, and no one knows what the costs are going to be. But he doesn't seem to be shy in removing dental access to the 10,000 youth that have been able to have dental care in my riding. Now over 1 million Canadians have received necessary dental care that we implemented, and the Conservatives are threatening this. Can the Minister for Public Services and Procurement explain to us how this programme benefits Canadians from coast to coast to coast? The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. It's Halloween, Mr. Speaker, and the Conservative leader is quite the prestidigitarian. He says that dental care doesn't exist. Poof! He just managed to make it disappear. He says that it doesn't exist, but he can't say why he's against this dental care. But there are 20,000 seniors in one single Conservative riding that can now have access to dental care. How will the Prime Minister, the leader of the Conservatives, make these 20,000 people disappear?
Mr. Speaker, 9 months ago, Belleville, Ontario was rocked by an opioid crisis. 36 overdoses in only 48 hours. This Prime Minister said he would be there for Belleville, Ontario, but after 9 months, not one more dollar for infrastructure, no more treatment beds. And just last week, we had 11 overdoses in only 2 hours. Wow. How many more months does Belleville, Ontario have to wait for any support for mental health from this Prime Minister?
I ask the Honourable Member from Orléans to not take the floor unless recognized. The Honourable Minister for Mental Health and Addictions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as the member well knows, I visited Belleville and met with the mayor and all stakeholders involved, because every loss of life in Belleville or in any community across this country is tragic, Mr. Speaker. But that is exactly why we launched the Emergency Treatment Fund, which is already open and accepting applications from municipalities and from Indigenous communities across this country, because we are there for communities, Mr. Speaker, each and every day. Harm reduction, treatment, all of these tools are healthcare, Mr. Speaker, and we will stand by communities and save lives.
The Honourable Member from Bay of Quinte.
Well, Mr. Speaker, while Belleville's waiting for any dollars from the federal government, Belleville's been paying dollars to the federal government. Belleville Council this week released a report that showed over the last 5 years they've paid $1.5 million to the carbon tax and getting no refund. You know, when this money could have went to supporting mental health, could have paid for the renovations for their hub for mental health. Not only that, when this Prime Minister quadruples that tax, Belleville's going to pay $5 million in 5 years. Why doesn't the Prime Minister give that money back to Belleville, or better yet, call a carbon tax election so Belleville and its residents can decide how to spend their money on mental health?
The Honourable Minister for Mental Health and Addictions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And let me be clear, actions speak louder than words. When the Conservatives were in power, Mr. Speaker, they cut the drug treatment fund by 2/3. Let me ask this to the member. Why does he allow the leader of the Conservatives to use those who struggle with addiction and substance use as props in fundraising rather than standing by those who need help? Why do they advocate to close safe consumption sites that have saved 58,000 lives? They don't care, Mr. Speaker. They will not invest in what's needed. On this side of the House, we are fighting to save lives. Shame on them for criminalizing people who need health care.
The honourable member from Kildonan and St. Paul's.
After 9 years of NDP Liberals, crime is up and churches are being targeted. A Winnipeg neighborhood saw a 61% increase in crime. Churches are having to pay thousands of dollars for repairs and security. One church had to put up an 8-foot barbed wire fence to keep criminals out. A woman was victim to an armed carjacking while leaving church, and 2 people died last month after a church was set on fire. In fact, 30 churches have been burned to the ground over the past few years, and countless more have been vandalized in Canada. When will the Liberals stop blocking the Conservative Bill C-411, which specifically holds arsonists accountable for church burnings?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, we believe in this country everyone deserves to be safe where they go to school, where they pray. Mr. Speaker, safety in our communities is our utmost importance. This is why we have provided more funding to help religious institutions, places of worship right across this country to put in place additional measures to help keep them safe. Mr. Speaker, we are deeply committed to this. This is not something that Conservatives own because we are investing in our communities to keep all places of worship safe.
The honourable member from Brampton South.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians from different ethnic backgrounds are now scared. They can be target of violent crimes by foreign nations. The RCMP believes agents from India have been targeting the Sikh community, bullying, blackmailing, and even plotting to kill some of them. Foreign interference is a serious issue, and all of us need to work together to protect Canadians. Can the Minister for Emergency Preparedness tell us, this House, to the best way to protect Canadians?
The Honourable Minister for Emergency Preparedness.
Mr. Speaker, the allegations made by the RCMP over the intimidation, the extortion, murder by a foreign government on Canadian soil should be taken serious by all parties. We owe it to the Sikh community and to all Canadians to put partisanship aside and work on solutions to assure the integrity and sovereignty of our country. And that is why it is deeply disturbing that the Conservative leader still refuses to get a security clearance. Why is he willing to put our democracy and the security of Canadians at risk?
The honourable member from London Fanshawe.
London families with loved ones trapped in Sudan have been failed by this government. It has been 8 months since the Liberals announced a program to bring families in Sudan to safety, but only 5 applications have been approved. As the humanitarian crisis in Sudan gets worse, more and more people will die. Londoners were promised their family would have a path to safety by this government. Will the minister fix his failed program so families can save their relatives before it's too late?
The Honourable Minister for Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship.
Well, we worked with families to devise this program. She also knows well, or should know, that since the war broke out, we have facilitated the departure of 9,000 people from Sudan. In this particular program, we will continue to reunite families and work through to make sure that they come to Canada in safety.
The Honourable Member from Saanich, Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. An unspeakable tragedy. A Canadian mother of 6, known as FJ only. Her 6 children were repatriated to Canada, but this government refused to allow their mother to travel with them. She is now dead in a Turkish prison. I ask the honourable government members here, the Minister for Public Safety, the Minister for International Affairs, will they follow the requirements of justice to have an immediate independent investigation into FJ's death and immediately repatriate all remaining Canadian detainees in northeast Syria?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the Honourable Member from Saanich Gulf Islands for her compassion and for her concern for people around the world. It's well noted and respected. My thoughts are indeed with children who have already endured so much in this particular situation. We are well aware of these reports, and we are treating this situation with the utmost seriousness and the sense of urgency it absolutely deserves. Unfortunately, I'm not able to comment further due to privacy concerns, but we will continue to keep this House updated. Thank you.